I wanted to start by saying thank you for listening, as well as for those of you who've been supporting Standard H by way of making purchases on the website. It's funny, I've had several people ask me if I'm a podcast that makes clothes or a clothing brand with a podcast. Though it is most certainly the latter, I'm just happy those of you who have discovered the brand at all, let alone enjoyed the products I make. If you don't mind leaving a review of the show through whatever app you're listening to this on, it will no doubt help others also discover the show and in turn the brand. And if I could ask a second favor, maybe tell a friend or two about Standard H. I couldn't be more proud of the community that's evolving, and all of you have been so great, be it through DMs on Instagram or the emails I've received. I'm a huge subscriber of the birds of a feather mentality and feel the best way to share a good thing is to include my friends. So if you could help share the pod, that would be awesome, and hopefully your friends will enjoy it as well. As always, thank you so much for the support. If you haven't heard episode 1 of the Standard H podcast, then let me tell you about my friend Tim Jackson. As owner of Passion Fine Jewelry, Tim and his team specialize in fine jewelry, as well as some of the finest independent watch brands available. I'm talking about Groenfeld, Habring, Kudoki, Roger Smith, Roman Gauthier, Sarpaneva, the list goes on. The staff at Passion Fine Jewelry is literally made up of friends and family, so you will feel right at home if and when you visit. If California is out of reach, you can absolutely email or call the shop and they'll get you sorted. Visit passionfinejewelry.com for more information. As you all know, I'm a huge fan of using the right product for the right job, and like many of you, I appreciate products with a story. That's why I drive a Volkswagen GTI. It's a hot hatch with heritage. It's also why I'm into specific watches like my Tudor Black Bay. And that's exactly why I'm a fan of the indie accessory brand Cantonment. Cantonment makes a utilitarian cloth they simply call a kerchief. It's smaller than a standard bandana, but larger than a handkerchief, which makes it ideal to tuck in a back pocket or use as a neckerchief. I always take one on a bike ride or have one with me as a backup face covering. Not only do these kerchiefs satisfy several functions, but they look great too. Each set features illustrations celebrating icons of product design like the Omega Speedmaster, the Fender Stratocaster, or my favorite of course, a classic GTI. Follow them on Instagram at CantonmentCo, that's CantonmentCo, or visit them at cantonment.co. And use the code STANDARDH in all caps, no spaces, for 20% off of absolutely everything in their online shop. Now let's get back to the show. Today's guest is the founder of a company many of you watch fans have heard of time and again, and my history with Ken Jacobs spans the better part of 10 years or so. So this conversation was a fun version of memory lane to take a stroll down, which we do just that out of the gate. The recording of this episode also happened to fall on the day I took delivery of my 5513 Submariner, a watch I consider to be my Grail sub. Ken does not come from a watch background. In fact, he had an entirely different career prior to starting Wanna Buy a Watch. More on that in the chat, and it was fun to dive deep into his history with timepieces and how he became one of the preeminent dealers of pre-owned and vintage watches, selling to many of the watch collectors with whom you and I are surely quite familiar. Something that seems to run in the Wanna Buy a Watch family is a sense of humor. The store is a warm embrace, and as we sat in the living room-like section in the front, a lot of laughing took place, and Ken was nothing shy of a great host. Needless to say, we take some twists and turns, including some neon clock discussion. Ken offers a wonderful glimpse into his life, and I can't thank him enough for his candor. As a result, I didn't edit much at all out of this conversation, mainly because I feel it really gives you a sense of who Ken is and his delivery, which I love. At the end of the day, he just wants to get great watches into the hands of great people, and I think that's why we keep coming back. If you haven't visited Ken and his team there on Melrose, I highly recommend it. I'm your host, Wesley Smith, and you're listening to the Standard H podcast. Ken, thanks so much for taking the time and allowing me to purchase a watch from you. I'm super excited about it. I kind of wanted to start things off, though, with my first visit. Now, remind me, you were on the same block for years. How far down you were? If we were to walk out of the store right now, we would take a right.
Right. It would take us about 30 seconds to get there if we're walking slowly.
And you were in that space for how long?
13 years.
Okay. So the first time we met, I'm guessing it was 2012, maybe 8 years ago. It was during the time, and I may have blogged about your store. I'm not sure, because I used to have a men's fashion lifestyle blog from like '08 or '09 to like 2013. At the time, I was working for James Purse on Melrose, so right up the street.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I was fascinated by a Rolex with a 3, a 6, and a 9 on the dial. It was a black dial, stainless steel. I later learned it was called a reference 1016.
Explorer 1.
I was enthralled with this piece. It was 36 millimeters. At the time, arguably contrarian, because everybody was going 40 millimeters and stuff with most watches. In fact, at the time, I would have had a Swiss Army watch primarily on my wrist those days, and that was like 38 to 40 mil. And it was kind of large even for like 1998 when I bought it. And then in 2012, it was kind of normal at that point. But I loved this reference 1016, and you were the one that started to talk to me about this. Now, I'd been in watches just from like an aesthetic approach, but you were actually the one that really started to well, Hodinkee did, frankly. Like, I found Hodinkee, but like, so maybe, you know what? Maybe I did know the reference number coming into your store at that point. 2012, yeah, I probably did actually. But you took the time to walk me through several pieces, and you know your industry better than I do, obviously, and I think you would probably attest. It's not always a warm embrace, you know, by certain dealers or stores, for example. Definitely not at the mall. You know, you get the eyes, the look up, look down, look at the wrist. Do you belong here thing?
Yes. Yeah. Warmth is not everywhere. It's usually here.
Yes.
Unless I'm really spun out, but generally it's warmth. And there certainly is a culture that I'm happy that it passes from me. It's not only Ken, but that the owner, the leader, establishes a culture,
sure,
a feeling about a store. So it's a great pleasure when someone comes in the store and I'm not even here, and they talk about how well they were received and how knowledgeable the person was who was helping them, not inundating them, not trying to impress them, not intimidating them, but helping them.
Right.
So it's a pleasure that the culture extends beyond my personality.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just having been a retail manager myself, the days off that I would have, knowing that people would come in and do exactly as you said, like, oh my gosh, Wesley, I came in last week and Susie, what's her face, helped me, and she was brilliant, you know, like that always made me feel great, you know, like even as just a manager, let alone an owner, I can only imagine.
Right. Our Susie, what's her face, is Kim with a Y.
Yeah. Fair enough. Yeah, so I wanted to share that story just because that was the first time I looked at it, but more importantly, I wanted to touch on the price, and I'm pretty sure that watch was $4,400 that day that I saw it. And, I did okay at James Purse. I didn't have $4,500 to spend on a watch in those days. But the obsession, I just wanted it and wanted it and wanted it. And then as I wanted it longer, the price just kept going up.
Wow. Well, I'm sorry you didn't get it because apparently someone else did.
Yeah.
It's not here anymore.
Right. Yeah.
And now that watch would be $15,000 or $16,000 or perhaps more.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. But again, I appreciated that warmth, and for whatever reason, in the back of my mind, I was like, one day there's going to come a time where I'm going to buy a watch here. And today was that day, basically, and it's my first vintage piece. You and I texted about it. We emailed about it. You weren't here 2 weeks ago when I came and saw it in person, but I found it on your website, which is a great website, by the way. You guys have great photos. You have great descriptions. it makes it a very seamless transition from internet to in person. So I wanted to first of all commend you on that, because not everybody does it.
It's great. It's great to hear. Great to hear that. Our photographer, I don't know if you got a chance to walk in the back today, but our photographer is here today.
Yeah.
And I am so indebted to him for the beautiful photographs he takes. Sometimes I look at the watch and I just gush and react. I mean, right. I know the watch. I bought the watch. I oversaw the restoration service of the watch, and then I see Brent's beautiful photos, and it's like, holy crap.
Yeah.
And then Miguel, who was adjusting your bracelet, is self-taught in so many different things, including watch repair, and some of the listeners may have seen some of Miguel's Fix It Friday videos.
Sure.
Where he's demonstrated some basic repair and adjustment, including using that poly watch.
Yeah, the
tube that I gave you.
Yeah.
And he has just taken, he is also responsible for a lot of our Instagram posts, and he's got a delightful sense of humor and sense of irony, and has enjoyed teaching himself. And so a lot of our Instagram posts are Miguel's doing.
I love it.
And so I'm grateful for each of them and the beautiful images that they bring.
Sure. I picked out a 5513, which is not an uncommon watch, but are getting rarer and rarer by way of their patina and things, like the things that are so driven by visual characteristics. Oftentimes when you're looking at vintage pieces, some people might not like a little rust on the hands, and some people may love more rust on the handset, and I feel like the pieces that you have are just really well curated and really well acquired, in the sense of they at least pique my interest in how they come across visually. Do you attribute that to your taste? Because you could choose to pick up certain inventory and not. So what are the kind of things that you look for when you pick up a piece?
Well, it's interesting, the term curated, because curated is some kind of a fancy word, and I never think of myself as the curator. But some of my dealer friends have used that term in describing the collection here. So apparently it must apply. So the pieces are certainly not acquired at random or whatever happens to come our way. My background has nothing to do with watches and jewelry. People assume that this must have been some family business.
Now, correct me. Were you a lawyer? No. Or something like what?
No.
I feel like you had a previous
my
career, right?
I certainly did. I was a clinical psychologist.
That's were you PhD, MD?
Yeah, PhD.
That's right. You're a PhD. I was thinking for some reason you're like a lawyer, meaning JD or whatever.
Yeah, no. My dad wanted me to be a lawyer, but I didn't want to stand up in front of people and get stage fright and lose my train of thought. So I became a psychologist where I can sit down and talk like you and I are right now.
Right.
The business for me is, and the inventory selection is driven by an aesthetic of beautiful watches in beautiful condition, great design of whatever era. Condition is supremely important. So I'm not a very particularly technical. I know more about movements than I did 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. But my strength is not about the technical. My strength is with picking out, with recognizing great design, including pieces that are unfamiliar or not mainstream or not particularly sort of what everybody is after.
Yeah, and I think that's why Curated is And I actually think that word is completely overused. I only use it, and I think it's applicable in this scenario because you, Ken, aren't designing these products, right? Like a lot of people think, oh, well, this collection is so well curated. Talking about stuff that's brand new, like you don't know. That's called designed, right? And manufactured. You're doing neither of those things, which is why I use that word, because you are the curator to your collection.
Right. I have hand selected everything that's here.
And it's beautiful.
And everything in this space. This is an audio, and anybody listening who's been in the store and I think has an impression about what the store looks like, what it feels like, the warmth, the welcomingness of it. My home doesn't look that different from this store.
Okay. Yeah.
With lots of vintage tchotchkes and interesting, cool things, and everywhere you look, you discover some other cool thing. And there's just an overall warmth and charm. And from the beginning, a gazillion years ago, it was about creating a setting that was suitable and that was that complemented these vintage watches. The watches complementing the environment complementing the merchandise.
Sure.
So it's interesting to me. I'm not an artist. I can't sit down and sketch and do beautiful drawings. But a gift that early on I learned that I had are things that draw my attention and my interest and that I think are beautiful are not idiosyncratic. So when I started out and I had 20 watches in the showcase and I was in a small little showcase in the back of somebody else's store, and people are looking at my 30 watches or so and saying, wow, you have really good taste. And it's like, I'm hearing that. It's like, okay, I'm following my eyes. It's not so much my head, it's my eyes to guide me. And if I can rely on that, that's what a gift. I don't have to think it through.
I was just about to say, you don't have to think about it. All you do is feel it.
And often, even today, if I may ask I'm at a watch show and I ask a dealer friend, what do you think about this? Well, if I'm asking the question, it's because I'm not convinced. So, and it doesn't mean I'm necessarily going to pass, but it's like I'm on the fence as to whether this is good or it's not good, or it's good but it's not great. Let's let it go, or what to do. But oftentimes it's when I need a second opinion. It's usually a pass because my my inner GPS kind of knows. Your
bullshit meter starts to go off. Is what it sounds like. So, well, let me ask you this. You started in the back of a store. What store was that and how long ago was that?
Approximately 40 years ago, I was working as a... All right, I can't let me back up a little bit.
Sure.
I came to California in 1976. I think my voice, my appearance, my everything belies my age.
Okay.
Thank God I got blessed with good genes. It's not healthy living or diet or exercise or whatever, although I do all of those things. But I think I got the gift of good genes. I came out to Camarillo to do an internship in clinical psychology at Camarillo State Hospital, which looked like a junior college at the time, and not like the East Coast mental institutions. I'm from Massachusetts. And coming out here, I discovered the Rose Bowl Flea Market.
Oh, right, yeah.
And at the time, initially shopping there for vintage furniture and so forth, turn-of-the-century oak furniture for the Victorian house that my wife at the time and I were renting in Ventura on Poli Street, down the block from the beautiful, beautiful courthouse over there. I had been a coin collector all my life. And a ridiculous story that I have to share is I was the kid who one day a week in junior high, I would take the bus downtown in Worcester, Massachusetts, with whatever money I had, $30, $40, $50. I don't think I had more than that. And I would go to the teller and I would get as many rolls of pennies, nickels, dimes, or quarters, go over to a counter by myself and go through them all looking for either silver coins, to silver dimes and quarters to pull out, any rare date Lincoln pennies, any Buffalo nickels that got mixed in with the Jeffersons, any S Mint, San Francisco Mint coins. And I would then re-roll them and take them back to the counter and get another roll and continue to do this until I was out of money or out of time or something. The street lights went on and I had to
get home for dinner.
Take the bus home.
Yeah.
So I was that kid who, and I mean, it sounds so, as I tell it, it sounds like so nerdy, but it was the same. There's the treasure hunting. There's the looking at condition. The minutia of attention to detail of grading coins,
sure,
and so forth.
Yeah.
So I'm that kid who I was always a collector. Seashells, stamps, and then coins. When I came out to California, I discovered at the time a popular fad was cutout coin jewelry. So the background would be cut out with jeweler's saws of the of Standing Liberty quarters, of Walking Liberty $50 and so forth, and made earrings out of them or necklaces and so forth, cufflinks. And I started dealing in those and consigning those at shops around Ventura and Camarillo. And at the Rose Bowl one day, which is the second Sunday of every month in Pasadena, this is not a paid advertisement, I ran into a UCLA student who was set up on a bridge table with pocket watches.
Sure.
And these were the very pretty hunting case pocket watches, not so much the technical railroad watches and the joke that every watch dealer talks about, making fun of the NAWCC guys with the 992B, which is a good quality but very common Hamilton railroad grade movement. Got it. You want me to say that again? 992B.
I grew up in North Carolina. I understood that quite well.
Okay. So I was intrigued and fascinated by these pocket watches because they're gold-filled and gold, particularly the hunting case, that were beautiful and functional. So they were beautiful, each one with individual engraving or engine turning, but they were functional. So coins are two-dimensional and they're flat and they're kind of nerdy. Like how many people, how long can will anybody, how do you have a conversation about coins unless it's another nerdy coin collector?
Coin collector, right.
But pocket watches, I mean, just the electricity went off. I could not believe how they were inexpensive, they were beautiful, they were interesting, they have all this social commerce possibility. Wearing one on a chain and you pull it out to tell the time and you push the button and the lid comes up, like, tell me that isn't cool.
Right.
Like, this is so much more interesting than coins, and interesting to the world, and it's the same as the same aesthetic. So, at any rate, just the light bulb went off. Like there's not something here. There's something giant here.
Just a major gravitational pull.
This is huge. These things are inexpensive. There's tremendous amount of value here. These things are valuable.
Yeah. At this time, were you wearing a watch? What was your first watch?
No, I was not wearing a watch. I didn't wear watches.
Interesting.
I got a blue dial electric Timex watch, either from my bar mitzvah or maybe when I graduated from high school. I'm not sure which. I don't have it any longer. But watches were not part of, like I said earlier, I'm not from the family of jewelry and watches and so forth. So,
sure.
And in fact, So that was the beginning of want to buy a watch with the pocket watches, and now we have a smattering of pretty but modest collection of pocket watches. But shortly after I began in business in 79, 80, whatever, I discovered wristwatches, and the first 4 wristwatches I bought were as is. I paid $35 each for 4 of them. I paid $140 for 4 wristwatches that had to be serviced and have nice straps put on them. And wearing this is in the early 80s. So to your question was, what watch was I wearing? I was wearing no watch. I was a rebel, so I was in college during the Vietnam War. I was absolutely in the world of hippies and marijuana and psychedelics and counterculture and opposition to the war and an optimism about changing the world. And that was my coming of age in college. So wearing a watch, it sounds silly saying this today. Wearing a watch seemed like this being conforming to some external demands about time and regulation and conformity. The 5-day work week with 2 days off on the weekend seemed so arbitrary to me. I mean, it is ridiculous saying this now, because it's sort of, the world kind of works well when there's a little bit of a.
I don't disagree with you. I still think that it's kind of arbitrary. The fact that it's a 9 to 5 Monday through Friday, a lot of people would pose the question, let's do a 4-day work week and work 10 hours a day. Mm-hmm. I don't know. There's countries in Europe that do that, and I can't remember which one right now. But
right.
But it is superfluous. Right. Who's to say you can't stay open till 2 a.m? Right. You probably just don't want to, right?
Well, not here, but certainly writers and other people keep late night hours.
Yeah, and creatives especially.
And now in these days, many of us are working at home and working all kinds of hours. But the point that I'm taking me a long time to get to is, it was not about time and the importance of time and the regulation and the order. It was about the aesthetic.
Right.
It was about these cool Art Deco Curvexes, beautiful Hamiltons, yellow gold, white gold, rose gold. In the time when the popular man's watches were, their virtue was their simplicity, the thinness of the watch. So by kind of an oxymoron, by design, their lack of ornamentation,
right,
and their plainness. Now, a gazillion years later, I kind of get that context, because some of those watches from the 60s and 70s and 80s that I used to talk trash about, now I'm seeing the virtue, the design virtue of some of those.
Certainly.
And the quirkiness, or the oyster quartzes, and obviously I don't have to speak about the Royal Oaks,
right?
And plain round paddocks. I mean, at an Orlando watch show in 1980 something, and a well-known dealer had a roll of round paddocks that were $500 each. And I'm there shopping for cool Hamiltons and Illinois and Gruins and Bullivas and fancy cases and all this cool stuff. And it's like, I don't get it. Like, yeah, it's a Patek Philippe, but look at them. They're like, there's nothing. They're round, plain watches. And of course, the fashion at that time was rectangular and cushion case, and round was we were getting away from round. And it's so interesting now we're back to round again. And rectangular Paddocks that were so valuable 20, 25 to 15 years ago, now the rectangular Paddocks are out of fashion, and now the fashion in most watches is round.
Sure.
So it's just sort of interesting that I have to sort of laugh at myself because I'm so flippant opinionated about what is good design and what isn't. And here are the watches, some designs that I was trash talking 25 and 30 years ago, and now I'm celebrating. And it's like, well, I'm not sure how to.
Right. Not sure how to feel about it. Yeah. Yeah. No,
So
I get
was
it.
I wrong then? Am I wrong now? Or, whatever.
Yeah. Can you even consider that growth? Like how do you label this? Which must be really a kicker for a psychiatrist
Psychologist.
or psychologist.
I can't
okay.
prescribe meds.
Okay,
I
gotcha.
can take them, but I can't prescribe them.
Right. Well, that's really interesting. So just to back up though, when you were selling in that store, what was the store that you started in?
So I was a psychologist working at a private psychiatric hospital, and I got a phone call from a guy I knew from the flea markets who did neon clock restoration.
Interesting.
And in the 70s and early 80s, neon had a magnificent revival. The neon clocks and neon signage, vintage neon signing, restoration of vintage neon signs. And so there was just this enormous proliferation of neon. He was selling vintage fishing lures to this landlord on Melrose, and who had a very tiny little space available on the street. Was I interested in going in there with him? He would do the neon clocks, and I would do the watches, and we would share the space. I would go there after work as a psychologist in the afternoons, and then on the weekend. And I was beside myself with an opportunity to be on the street that I was fascinated and intrigued and so excited about.
Yeah, it was the street.
It was the street in the early 80s, and for at least 20 years.
And you were called "Wanna Buy a Watch" from day one? Or were you just Ken Jacobs, or like what were you under then?
I was want to buy a watch right away.
And that was named based on the question?
Yes.
Yeah. Cuz is there a question mark in your sign?
Well, the bank doesn't like the question mark.
Okay.
So it always had the question mark because the name of the business is Want to Buy a Watch.
Sure.
And the question mark is not so essential anymore.
Right.
Because the bank doesn't want that question mark.
Well, and you have customers coming in telling you, "I want to buy a watch."
Right.
You don't have to ask anymore.
Right. Oh, and it works whether somebody wants to buy a watch or they're looking to sell a watch.
Fair.
But people have, I was telling Kim with a Y earlier today that whoever I've been asked a few times. Well, I certainly asked where did the name come from? When you're sort of addressing, but also asking like, who came up with that name? And they're talking to me. And it's like, who do you think came up with that name?
Maybe the better question is, how did you come up with that name?
Maybe that's what they meant.
Which then it also sounds obvious because it's kind of like that's the business, right?
Well,
if you're in the business of selling watches, it kind of behooves you to say, "Hey, want to buy a watch?"
Right. And that's interesting you say that, because that to me, my answer to the question is, how did you come up with that name? My answer is simple. It's like, it was obvious. I didn't have to think about it. I didn't go to a brain trust and pay to have them come up with some names and for me to pick one out of a list. It's like, that was the one and only name that occurred to me, and it's apparently it's stuck.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. Like, what I'm picking up on a lot is the feel. Again, this is all like visceral. This is all just kind of second nature to you.
Yes.
Either it be your picker, so to speak, or even your approach to naming the business itself. It just seems like whatever feels right is what you do, which I don't know. Like, what do you attribute that to? Like, what did your parents do when you were a kid? Like, because you trust your gut, obviously.
I'm at a loss for words. I don't know that anything came from my parents. Any of this quality. Okay. I think this. This is. Some people are. You hear about people talking about being really visual. They learn visually. Mm-hmm. Some people are auditory. Some people you say something and say, wait a minute, let me write that down. Well, no, it's simple what I'm saying. No, I know, but I just want to write it down. So there's different styles of learning. For me, and I can't speak for other people because I only live inside of me. Is I am so visual.
Yeah.
And I live and consume a visual world, art, architecture. I do a lot of photography. I've done photography for as long as I can remember. I don't sit in a dark room and process film, but I see things that are beautiful, and the camera is wonderful because you can compose the picture. You see all of this, but I see something within that. And right. I'm not saying that this is a unique quality. I think photographers do that because they take good pictures. It's not like just snapping. A lot of people don't take good pictures, which fascinates me. Like how do you manage to not take good pictures?
Yeah. No, I know exactly what you mean though. Is when something comes easy to you when somebody else can't get it. It's a struggle to to understand how it's possible that somebody can't do it when it comes so easily to you.
Right. Or to recognize that it's a gift, and and each of us with whatever our gifts are, and of course we take it for granted because it comes easy, but something else comes very hard, and different things come easy to other people.
Sure.
But not so much for the interview, but you've intrigued me. Like where did this come from? I mean, I'm kind of an undisciplined person, mm-hmm. and I go with my gut, and I'm very you might say impulsive, you might say childlike, and saying childlike in the context that we're talking about is not such a bad quality. I'm spontaneous.
I would call it instinctual.
Yeah, that's a nice word.
Yeah,
that's not nearly as pejorative as the words I'm thinking of.
We're all our own worst critic, right?
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
What did your dad do for work?
My dad was a glazier. He owned a glass company that did storefronts, replaced auto glass, did window sash.
Was he artistic in that way?
I don't think so.
Like driven by aesthetics and
I don't think so. My parents were a very handsome couple. They dressed very well. They were great dancers. I mean, not great dancers. I mean, they weren't professional dancers, but sure. they were good dancers.
Yeah. My
dad was a very handsome guy. My mother was a very pretty woman. My mother did paint by the numbers. She had many. I don't know if anybody in the audience is, your listeners is old enough to know if they still produce these things, but sure. She did the painting by the numbers. Then she framed them. They were on the walls in our house. She did copper enameling that were pretty, but so there was some. She had some aesthetic, and she, of course, she knit and made Afghans and so forth.
Cool.
But I don't know that I don't know where this
how you became so instinctual.
Yeah. But I'm glad I did.
Yeah, no, yeah, exactly. What was your first car?
My first car was my first car was a motorcycle.
Oh, interesting.
My first car was a Honda 300 Scrambler. That between my freshman and sophomore years in college, I worked as a pool boy, lifeguard, swim instructor at the Pennsylvania Hotel in Atlantic City. This is before the resurrection of Atlantic City when it became a casino haven.
Yeah.
And actually it was 1969 because I missed the memo about Woodstock. And knew nothing about Woodstock, and I was in Atlantic City, and I imagine I would have gone. I did go to New York to get my what is it called from the Mahesh Yogi. Pardon me for messing that up. Getting Kim, do you know what did you get from Mahesh Yogi for your meditation? Your mantra.
Oh, so your transcendental meditation mantra.
Yes. So I did go. I didn't go to Woodstock, but I did go to New York for
your TM mantra.
Yeah, to get my TM mantra.
Well, do you practice TM?
No,
still?
not one bit. No, not at all.
Why?
I'm too ADD from meditation.
Okay. Okay, so back.
So with the savings from being a pool boy and being charming and working for tips, I saved enough and paying bupkis in this subterranean apartment that several of us lived in that summer, and getting free submarines and pizzas at the sub shop. Saved enough money when I went back to college in the fall to buy my Honda 300 Scrambler.
Amazing. We'll get back to some more car talk a little later because I want to talk about what's out front. But,
okay.
But that'll come. But back to some business at hand. So you're selling in this store a mile away, roughly.
Right.
Then you move eventually down the street, as we alluded to, where I went.
I shared the space. So I was down in that area, that fantastically popular era for decades. Was there for 15 or 16 years.
Okay.
So the first shared space I described, and then someone who had a whole retail store called Slightly Crazed. Mm-hmm. And the crazing refers to the crazing of pottery.
Okay.
But so that was another very clever name, Slightly Crazed.
Right.
And he invited me to basically lease the back of his store, and I set up a horseshoe-shaped counter with my watches.
Right.
And that was for 2 years, and then the space next door became available, and then I moved next door and opened the first Wanna Buy a Watch. So that previous store was Wanna Buy a Watch at Slightly Crazed. So the location was the shop was Slightly Crazed, but it was Wanna Buy a Watch at Slightly Crazed. And then for 2 years I was Wanna Buy a Watch next door with tons of neon, with a wall of neon clocks, which was still popular. And then a bigger space became available the next block, where Olivia Newton-John's Koala Blue store was, and that had been she had a store with her clothing line, and they had an Aussie juice milk bar. Is that what it's called? Milk bar?
Okay.
Juice bar? And that was a 2,000 square foot space that was vacant for a number of years when her business closed. And then finally that landlord divided it in two. And this was a 2-story Spanish-style building, 2,000 feet downstairs, 2 upstairs, and they divided the bottom into a 1,000-foot space. I consulted with a designer friend who I had met, and we set out to recreate a 1920s California mission-style jewelry store in that building, redoing the entire facade of the building, the whole 4,000-foot facade, and doing. I'm just doing a lot of elaborate work to our 1,000 square foot space, but redoing the entire facade of the building at my own expense to make this, to return this old Spanish style architecture into something beautiful with a lot of faux finish, and I mean just lots of beautiful beauty, and redoing the hardwood floor and doing a distressed hardwood floor, and there were columns on one wall, and then we put in faux columns on the opposite wall.
Oh wow! Yeah.
I mean, we and I have pictures. I have pictures of that store.
Oh, cool.
And that store, this store, and that store were designed by the same woman who designed that store.
So yeah, you have all like the case lines and or vitrines.
These
or
showcases are the same showcases.
Same ones, yeah, yeah.
So loved this store, and I did not want to leave that store.
So why did you leave it?
The area went downhill.
Got it.
And we were going upscale, and we're dealing with more and more expensive goods, and the area, the area turned, and it became less appealing for customers, and that our demographic had changed, and ultimately, and I loved that store, and I loved that space that we created, but it was time to go. We'd become, as somebody said it to me, and it was like just a knife through my forehead. You have a store for adults, and you're in a kid's neighborhood. Right. And it's like, holy shit. Yeah. Wow. Does all the obsessing and ruminating, should I, shouldn't I, what's the pluses, what's the minuses, and it's like, oh, that's the story. Boom, time to move. Yeah. Time to go. Yeah, I mean, this is the best layout of a space of any, and it's way better than the layout of the other space that allowed us to create this space with this lounge. And this is the first time I've sat in the lounge and done what we're doing. I have sat in the lounge, but this is as proud as I am, and as nice of some of the stores that we've had, and this one that I was showing you the pictures of. This is by far our crowning achievement.
That's great,
and it gives me so much pleasure to be able to host people here and to have people come in here and say, like, wow, what a cool store. And when people walk in here for the first time and they walk up to the counter and they start engaging specifically, on a specific watch or something, it's like, are you not taking in the environment? Do you like this? This is not like this is not like everybody else's store. This is not like anybody else's store. This place is fucking cool.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's unlike anything that it neighbors as well. Like, I mean, everything else around this block, even in the last 15 years, has been so much more modern.
Absolutely.
Like, this has definitely been kind of a staple, even with its aesthetic. Like, as you've moved, it's retained that same vibe, that same aura, the same feel, the same warmth. And it's very welcoming. And I think, obviously, again, a testament to maybe your eye and your instincts. But, the industry's grown so much over the last even 10 years, even the last 5 years. With the industry changing, and even though you've moved spaces and stuff, like, your physical location doesn't really affect that necessarily. But, like, how has your business changed in general over the last, say, 5-10 years since I've been visiting your stores?
Well, so many things have happened in the marketplace. All right, so years ago, the what watches were of interest and in demand and sought after changed drastically. Mm-hmm. So all of what I was referring to, that old Melrose and those wonderful Art Deco watches and the Hamiltons and Gruens and Elgins and so forth, long ago, and guys would celebrate having rolls of them. They would have one roll, they would have two rolls, they have three rolls, and it was just such a source of pride of how many different ones they had, and they loved them. And then they started interest in the sport Rolexes, Rolex Bubblebacks, which is like another whole story unto itself. That just we could talk for an hour about Rolex Bubblebacks.
Yeah.
And I don't think we have a Bubbleback in the showcase today. And there were years when we would have 20 or 30 Bubblebacks in the showcase.
Right.
And that was what made our Rolex showcase not Submariners and GMTs and $4,400 Explorer 1s.
Yeah.
So guys started wanting to trade in their one or two rolls of watches for one or two better watches. So we started seeing the consolidation of cool-looking but less prestigious watches for paddocks, for Rolexes. So there was definitely a consolidation or out of more less expensive watches into fewer, better brand, I suppose, Rolexes and paddocks and Vacherons and so that was like the second wave. The first wave was of all this, that preceded it, and then the whole marketplace moved away from those watches. And we continued to sell many of those long after anybody else in the industry was buying or selling them.
Sure.
Because nobody wanted them anymore. But in terms of, there was still a demand for beautiful watches that were, so we would, I used to like to say that you don't have to come in here and spend a lot of money to get a beautiful watch. We have watches from $500 to many thousands of dollars, and you don't have to spend a bunch of dough to get something that's distinctive and really cool. So there was less interest in those rectangular cases, but we would still buy some.
Sure.
That market is almost completely gone now, as did the watches. The military watches. Again, 30 and 40 years ago, the military enamel dial, cushion case, round case, sterling silver, Elgins and Waltham, the World War I, the Boer War era watches were popular. The flak with the flak grill protecting the crystal, and the rectangular watches from the 20s and the 30s, and that has all changed. I mean, there's a lot. I occasionally read or hear of different theories about we aspire to the objects, including cars, that our father or maybe our grandfather wore. So, this generation are not restoring Model Ts and so forth, but they may be going for the wedge cars of the 60s and 70s and so forth. So anyway, whatever drives the aesthetic and the demographic, and the people who are buying watches from cool watches from the 20s and 30s, that's no longer the aesthetic. So I don't buy watches from the 20s and 30s anymore. It's more in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, and in terms of the vintage
Right.
world.
Sure. One thing I did want to ask is what your opinion is on, or what's your take on the spike in prices over the last, say, 2-3 years? Really, the last 2 years, especially. Let me ask you this too, as a qualifier. Have your costs gone up just as much as the buyer's costs have gone up? When you've sourced watches over the last 2 years, are you bleeding out of your eyes as well? Or
you better believe it.
Yeah, I figured.
You better believe it. The price increase. I mean, there's been a gradual increase in price over time.
Sure.
I mean, what I've seen over time is there's a rise in price. There's a rise in prices associated with a rise in demand and popularity, and prices are run up, and then it kind of plateaus for whatever reason, whatever the circumstances are. Maybe there's a small dip, and that plateau may last 6 months. It may last a year, maybe 2 years, and then there's another rise up, and this is over time, because it's not a straight graph. The curve is not.
But that's kind of standard operating procedure, right?
Yeah, yeah. But that said, the increase in pricing in our cost since pre-COVID,
Right.
has been obscene.
Right.
It's obscene. The demand for watches is mind-boggling.
Do you have any insight as to why this is? I mean, obviously the stock market did well over maybe not the last few months, but say 2020. People are working from home, arguably maybe too much free time, occupying it by reading Hodinkee and educating themselves and starting. I mean, I've never heard so many times in the last 2 years where the term investment has come up in relation to collecting. Like, that word has been just salted and peppered conversations constantly. But like, do you have any insight as to why this is happening? And if the answer is no, I completely understand, because I don't have a clue other than what I've said.
Right. Seems like I should have something to say about this. The investment side of the watch business, of watch collecting, I probably can't speak to very, very well. The increase in pricing associated with demand, I understand.
Sure.
And if we look at the number of articles in all kinds of publications about vintage watches in the last 30 years, and if anybody, I'm sure somebody has compiled how many articles have been written, more broadly about watches in general. The question you're asking about, we're not talking about just vintage watches, but watches, and the Royal Oaks and the Nautiluses and the RMs, and the enormous value now being assigned to these pieces, these objects. And as I say over and over again, including to customers who come in the store, nobody shops here for lack of means to tell the time. These are all optional, discretionary purchases. Sure. So you only have to please yourself. Do you like it? What's your budget? Well, of course, nobody spends what their budget is, because the prices are beyond everybody's budget for whatever category. As the $4,400 Explorer 1 was beyond your budget at the time, and
yeah, it's like renovating your kitchen. It's just triple the cost and triple the time.
But I don't think this answers your question directly. But I mean, I think in terms of the importance in our culture, in our society, in our social society, and our affluent society of the wristwatch has taken on extraordinary value, social value.
Right, the currency, yep.
So, yeah, social currency. It's huge social currency. So that's an interesting phenomenon. So we've read for years about women have all kinds of jewelry that they can wear, necklaces and earrings and bracelets galore and rings galore, multiple rings. What does a guy get to wear?
Right.
A guy is very limited, so the watch becomes important. And then is the Apple Watch going to kill the watch market? Because there's limited real estate for a watch. You can't wear multiple watches, although occasionally somebody will. But it's like, I was ready to write to Apple, but when we started first hearing that they were working on developing an Apple Watch, it's like, you guys have it wrong. Like, look how popular it is for guys to wear cool watches, and whatever cool happens to represent for them. And you're going to occupy that one piece of real estate, right. I said this the other, anatomical real estate, and you're going to usurp that. It's like, you guys have it all wrong. Apparently, once again, I was all wrong. My instinct was wrong.
Yeah, because it introduces watches to people who have otherwise not been into watches, which is kind of cool.
So anyway, not so much the investment side, but the demand. Why are prices up so much? Certainly the supply chain. But if there weren't demand, then the supply chain wouldn't matter.
Right.
It's all about demand.
Yeah.
So, and the demand is huge. That people want to have a cool. I was about to say I stopped. I was about to say a cool Rolex, because that's most of what we sell here. A cool watch, but for the most part in our business and where we are in the big picture of the watch world, we are in the vintage and pre-owned Rolex world, and most people come in here for Rolex watches.
Right.
And that's has high social value.
Sure. Well, realizing you don't have a crystal ball, what would you say is sort of next for the vintage market? Be it price or style or brand, or any kind of predictions you might have? Say over the next, 2 years, since we've been speaking about the last 2 years.
I lack the gift of being a visionary. And I'm kind of like the rest of us, along for the ride.
Sure.
And I'm not. I mean, it's more than that. Along for the ride. I was thinking about this also in thinking about some of the topics that we might touch on. Is we have always, as I was saying earlier, we've always been very strong in promoting in media beautiful images of our watches, and that creates demand. That has created demand. I've actually lost track of the point that I'm making.
Just kind of predicting the future.
Let me talk about the present rather than the future, or what the shift that has occurred in the last several years, which is the shift towards what someone else has coined the neo-vintage. So really the sport Rolexes from the 80s and the 90s, 5-digit reference numbers, sapphire, not exclusively, but sapphire, it now includes sapphire crystals, certainly tritium looms, all the better if the loom has patinaed and has some warmth and character.
Right.
But not exclusively. The distinction between vintage and modern. So we used to be asked that all the time, and now I'm going back 10 and 15 and 20 years. What's this concept of a vintage watch? Well, like what makes a watch vintage? Like how old does it have to be? And kind of in the world of Rolex, it's kind of one primary defining characteristic is sapphire crystal versus plastic crystal. So plastic crystal is kind of vintage, and sapphire crystal was modern. Well, now time has moved on, and now much, not all of the neo-vintage are really the sapphire crystal, 5-digit reference numbers. 5 digits, little educational thing. 5 digits refers not to the sapphire crystal, but to a quick-set movement.
I see.
4 digits is a non-quick-set movement. 5 digits is sapphire. There are some 5-digit plastic crystal watches that are quick-set, like the quick-set GMT, the 16750. Quickset GMT is still plastic crystal, but 5 digits because of a quickset movement.
Gotcha.
So that this neo-vintage era is certainly an area that we have been focusing on. The prices are not as high as the very sought after 4-digit reference GMTs and subs. And as an aside, we used to have a hard time selling GMTs because everybody wanted a sub. A guy wanted a sub. And that's what a sub is a man's watch. GMT is I don't know what, sexually ambiguous. I'm not really sure. So it's so interesting now to see that GMTs have taken on their own something. You have a word for me?
Well, they're certainly time zone ambiguous.
Well, I mean, GMTs are now as popular, if not more popular, than subs.
Than the subs,
so
yeah.
they've definitely risen from not from the ashes, but they've certainly are. We may get more demand for GMTs now, and whether it's a Pepsi or no. Got to do the Saturday Night Live shtick with
right.
No Pepsi, Coke.
Right. So as we're kind of wrapping up here, I do want to talk about the car out front. So when I met you out front before we started recording, you told me it was a 1979 MGB.
Yes.
How did this car come into your possession? What's the story?
Well, let's say that my wife gave it to me, but actually she didn't. I gave it to her. I bought it for my wife for our 25th wedding anniversary. I couldn't get her another piece of jewelry. I couldn't get her another watch. All right, what am I going to get her? She's been pining and whining for a vintage MG for years, and I'm not a car guy. I'm a little tiny bit, little baby finger of a car guy. Just don't ask me any technical questions. And I found I didn't know how to go about doing that. The 60s MGs have chrome bumpers, and then the 70s MGs have the rubber bumpers because of safety regulations. They have headrests. God, well, you definitely have to have a car with a headrest. But I found Darren's MG in Chatsworth, and I drove out there. Do you have any MGs? So he specializes in MG service. Do you have any MGs for sale? Do you have any customers who have any for sale? No, time to time I do, but I don't have anything now. He restored an MG for this customer who I ended up buying the car from, who ended up, of course, being a customer of Want to Buy a Watch.
Right.
Franklin was on the verge of selling the car, but the guy who was going to buy it was going to export it, and Franklin didn't want his car to go overseas. Darren from Darren's MG, he showed me pictures of it. He pulled out a file and showed me pictures of this car. He called Franklin. Franklin was receptive to selling me the car. My brother-in-law, who knows a little bit about cars, came with me. We went to a public parking lot with this gorgeous black limited 1979 last year of production, and they were all done as limiteds because we're trying to juice up the end of production. The car is all restored cosmetically and mechanically by the MG mechanic Darren. $8,500. It's like, this is heaven. I'm going to surprise my wife for our 25th wedding anniversary with this car. We are going up to Arrowhead for the weekend. My brother-in-law is going to take care of hiding the car in his neighborhood at his neighbor's house. We're going to stop by my in-laws' house on the way up to Arrowhead for them to give her an anniversary gift for our 25th anniversary. We're in the house, and I have staged it that my brother-in-law is going to pull up with the ribbons on the MG into the driveway and blow that cute little horn. And I'm going to act all surprised, like, what's that? We go out in the driveway, and there's this car with the ribbon, like in the TV commercials.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And my wife is beside herself that I've pulled off this feat of buying this car, hiding it, coming up with a foil to be able to stop by where the car is being stashed. Miles pulls up into the driveway and honks the horn, blows the horn, toots. It doesn't blow it; it toots. It toots the horn. And my wife is just beside herself, and we are going to head up to Arrowhead, and she's got her Audrey Hepburn scarf on.
Oh, amazing.
And then she found the car too hard to drive, and even though she has long legs, the clutch has to go all the way to the floor. And we even had Darren put on a block so it sits up high. My wife is not like some petite, tiny, short little person. She's got longer legs than me. I love driving this car, but it is effortful.
Right.
It is effortful.
Yeah.
It's effortful getting in, getting out. It drives great. I love driving it. I feel like a hot shot, as I said to you. It's my Porsche. Anyway, she stopped driving it, and not only did she stop driving it, she now has turned it around that I have bought it for myself. So this wonderful gift that I gave her and orchestrated and created and gave her, that she was thrilled for a few weeks or a little bit longer, maybe, now has been undone. That like I've carried out this charade of pretending to buy it for her, but actually buying it for myself by virtue of her having released it to me.
Right.
So, as I said, my wife gave me this car, but I thought I had given it to her, but apparently she gave it to me.
That's hilarious. What else is in the garage?
It's what isn't in the garage, because the garage we now call the Bat Cave, because this car, the top never goes up. It's only a fair weather car.
Got it.
Because the canvas top is too hard to put up and take down. So if it's too hot, I don't drive it. If it's too cold, I don't drive it. But I had to clear out years of accumulation of want to buy a watch history and boxes of stuff like, oh, I can't throw that away.
Right, right.
And auction catalogs from the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, and so much stuff in order to give for our garage to have enough room to pull the MG in to the garage, because I don't leave it out. Certainly, we have a 2-car garage, and I had to make enough room to squeeze the small MG in the garage. And actually now there's more room in there, but it's what's not in the garage that is really the story, rather than what is in the garage.
Got it. What else are you driving?
I drive a Subaru. I drive a Subaru Outback.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. I was saying, there's three of our employees drive Subarus.
Really?
Kim with a Y, of course, drives a Mercedes.
Right.
What else would you expect of her?
So I'm curious, why the white dog outside? Because you have these like little figurines of white dogs. Do you have a white dog at home?
That's not a white dog. That's Nipper.
Okay, not just any white dog.
My wife says, have you fed the dog? Now our dog is the dog? He doesn't have a name? We're not attached to him? This is Nipper. This is the RCA dog. This is the image of the Victrola with the big horn speaker, and listening to the RCA advertising for Thomas Edison has designed the Victrola or whatever.
We had one of those in my house when I grew up.
Yeah, they're so cool. But that's Nipper. So I'm always drawn to all right, here's a story. Here's the story about Nipper, and I'll try to keep it relatively brief. So as you see here in all the objects and tchotchkes and so forth that are around here and cool things. So my neighbor was having a yard sale, gave me the heads up, got to go there first, and she had this 36-inch high plastic Nipper model. She's a dog person. She didn't have kids. Her house was full of dog sculpture, dog paintings, and Nipper was in the corner of the living room. And it was like a fixture. It was part of her home, part of her family. She was selling Nipper at her yard sale. It's like, are you kidding me? I thought you were attached to this. No, I've had it long enough, done with it. Struck a deal, bought Nipper, brought it to the store, and Nipper became our watchdog. Nipper became our watchdog. So he was inside the store and would to greet people and so forth, and just kind of the fun of being a watchdog in a watch store. And one day, employee took it upon himself to put Nipper outside the store, which I thought was just genius, because it marks the store, it announces us being open, because there is Nipper out on the street. When Nipper's on the street, the store is open. So it became, along with our Gruen neon clock, it became another identifier.
That's cool.
And the water bowl that's out there that my daughter, when she was in elementary school, made, and that's the water bowl for Nipper, which he shares with all the dogs in the neighborhood. And it's a hoot watching the dogs in the neighborhood, and some of them, sniffing Nipper, other dogs like just terrified by Nipper, little dogs that are freaking out.
That's too
but
funny.
many of them, it's our local water hole for the local dogs.
I love that.
So, I don't know if you noticed or not, it was covered with. So we have a little green AstroTurf thing out there, because of course Nipper shouldn't be sitting on the hard pavement; he's sitting in the grass.
Right.
But now it's covered with all the leaves that have fallen and so forth. So he's our mascot. He's our spokesmodel. When we have events, it's Nipper who is the announcer and the host of the event, and we have a whole series of posters. You didn't see that, of banners that are a really brilliant graphic designer did this whole series for all the holidays, Valentine's Day and the Jewish holidays, and Hanukkah. We're about to put Hanukkah up there, and for Christmas with plays on Nipper, like tongue-in-cheek stuff featuring Nipper.
Oh, that's amazing.
So that's not just a white dog. That's Nipper.
Right. How dare I offend him? I'm sorry, Nipper. Is there anything such as a Grail watch for someone like you? Like, is there anything that you like? What are you wearing today? First of all,
well, interesting, because as I was saying earlier about neo vintage,
right?
So this is a reference 16800 with a matte dial. So we've got a quick set, 5 digits, quick set movement, sapphire crystal. And the first couple of years of production of the 16800, they continued the matte dial from the 1680, but with the depth rating, the higher depth rating of 1,000 feet for the sapphire crystal.
Got it.
So the first couple of years you have a matte dial before they went to the white gold surrounds dial on the 16800. So this one has the look and appearance of the 1680 with the matte dial. It's got great patina. It's got a aged, faded bezel. The quick set hardly matters, because I don't think I set the date or wear it regularly enough to care about the date. I do use it for the time. But it's this blend of vintage and modern, and it's, to me, it's like just a perfect easy blend. I mean, this is one of 15 Rolexes I have, but this is a relatively new acquisition, and one that's easy to wear.
Sure.
All the time.
Yeah. That's amazing. So is that your most recent acquisition?
This one and the gold counterpart to it.
Ah, okay.
The gold with nipple dial 16808 with an aged dial where the blue has really faded and it's kind of a goldish blue. And actually, I've nicknamed it the dial I've nicknamed as Stonewashed Jeans.
Oh, interesting.
Because the color of the dial is like old faded blue jeans.
Wow.
Like I'm wearing now.
Oh, I'd love to see that, actually. You'll have to text me a photo of that.
I will.
That sounds super
It was
cool.
either wearing that watch or this watch today, and this is the steel one I wore. I didn't want to show off my gold watch.
Oh, that's okay. So when we met out front on the sidewalk, we basically parked at the same time. You were carrying a satchel and or tote or something with 2 tennis rackets in it.
Yes.
Are you a big tennis guy?
I play tennis a couple of times a week, and glad to say that I can. And there may be nothing that I look more forward to than playing tennis.
That's great.
And I'm so flippin' grateful that I still can play, and I hope that I don't have to eat my words in 3 months or 6 months when my knees go out or something.
Right.
But yes, that's as long-winded though I am. I need to change into my tennis gear and then head over the hill to the valley and play tennis for a couple of hours.
Oh, I love it.
And of course, Kim with a Y, which you could see, is an avid tennis player.
Totally.
Who, I have not had the pleasure of watching play, and I couldn't play against her because I would be
Demolished?
Yes.
That's okay.
But she's a shrewd and clever one, and she plays doubles, and she always picks a great partner. It's because she likes to win the tournaments.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, Ken, I can't thank you enough for taking the time. This has been a blast. I love my new watch.
You got a good one.
My new old watch.
You got a good one. I'm so appreciative of your loyalty to us. I wish I could say that I remembered us meeting those years ago when the Explorer 1s were only $4,400.
Yeah,
Did I say that before?
Yeah.
I don't remember.
There's no chance you would remember because, I mean, you're also providing. We didn't even touch on this, but it's really probably even shouldn't talk about it. But like you provide a lot of watches for a lot of people, and your customer base is it's famous. I mean, you're want to buy a watch has been mentioned in countless articles, countless interviews, countless, representations of collections of so many people far and wide that it's quite remarkable, A, and B, it's just cool. Like, just to know, like, I mean, what does that even feel like to you? Like not to get like all celebrity famous and like, oh, goo goo gaga about these people, but like, I can only imagine how proud you are.
Thank you. It is. I do feel very proud. In a very personal way. Oftentimes I lose sight of what you just described, and typically I don't have that sense. And I certainly am delighted that that's the case. And it's always so refreshing and reassuring when I hear someone say, like, well, you don't realize how well known you are. You don't realize. I don't want to say how big you are because it's not about bigness.
Well, I feel like it's larger than that. I think it's a reputation thing, which to me supersedes fame.
Well, again, for me, it's
because you could be famous for the wrong reasons.
Yes, yes. I think we're trustworthy. We're honest. Are we perfect? No. Are we the most expert at everything? But we have integrity. We're about quality. We're about integrity. If I screw up, if I do something wrong, I'm going to take responsibility for it. I'm going to make it right. I'm not going to wiggle out of something. Generally, I'm not going to do something that puts me in trouble or puts me in a bad light with someone where,
right.
I mean, the joy of providing this service, and you said how many people have watches from us.
Sure.
And when I think of one day there not being a wanna buy a watch, it's like, how could I do that to this community? I mean, and of course there's, as I said to somebody, to a young gun the other day, as one star sets on the horizon, another rises on the opposite horizon.
Sure.
But there has been this sense of, I love having obviously I have a store. I've always had a store and not a booth and not an office somewhere. Right. And make it pretty. And this is my home. This is my living room. And this really is now the living room. And a place for people to come into, and a place that's known, and a place that said, oh, what a cool watch that is. Where did you get that? Want to buy a watch. And people come in here and say that. I saw somebody, and I admired their watch, and I said, where did you get it? And they said, want to buy a watch.
Right.
It's like, well, In terms of one's satisfaction with what they do in their life, and I'm not somebody making money in an office, doing deals, doing trades with invisibility. I mean, for me, there's obviously great satisfaction in being known, in being visible, in not so much in being famous, but being visible and making a mark.
I feel like there's something to be said for the handshake, like being present, being the face of your company, providing that service, and at the end of the day, shaking hands and saying thank you. I mean, that's invaluable. Like it's incredible.
Thank you for this opportunity. It's been it hasn't just been a recital of things that I already know, but you've asked me things into and as you see, I think I'm also a thinker, and I think about. So I very much appreciate this opportunity to talk with you, and appreciate you in indulging me as I've gone off, maybe not off the deep end, but off on some tangents. But it's an interesting thing that you're doing, because you're interviewing the individual, and it's my pleasure and certainly my honor to be one of your subjects.
Great. Thanks so much, Ken. Really appreciate it. I'd like to thank Ken one more time for taking part in the show, as well as to Jensen Reed and Super Beautiful for providing the theme track, as well as to Clear Audio for providing the noise-canceling headphones. I hope you guys stick around in 2 weeks' time for episode 77. I've got a fun one coming up with a good friend of mine. So for you car and more specifically Porsche fans, I think you'll enjoy that one as well. Thanks so much for listening. Again, if you could share it with some friends, I'd greatly appreciate it. And take care. Ciao.